I'm going to call the meeting to order.
Okay.
We'll begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you all for coming, and for those who are watching at home by the fireplace. Are there any emergency modifications to the agenda?
There is
I've not
none.
heard of any. Looking for approval of the agenda.
I'll move to approve.
I'll second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
None opposed. So just wanted to mention, Michael Shanahan has a meeting with his job, I believe, this evening, conflict, and Kevin is on his way, so he will be joining us. We'll begin with public comments, unless people would rather just, if there's someone who wants to say something at the very beginning. No? We'll just,
I'm filling this out. I just want to make
Yeah.
a quick announcement.
okay.
Is that okay? Andy, you know what this is about, but you were too busy to respond to my email.
Email today, right?
Yeah, today.
Yeah, come on forward.
Hi, everybody.
Wasn't a week
Seen
ago or
you all in
something.
so long. Welcome, Shelley. You've been around here, but we haven't met. I'm Annika Forrester, and I am a thorn in some people's sides sometimes, but I hope everybody has a good time. I just wanted to follow up on the general theme that I tend to always come to talk about, which is the topic of cross-cultural communications, cross-language communications, the fact that our district is approximately 30% Hispanic, and therefore we have a very high percentage of potentially non-English speaking parents. And in the spirit of improving communication in all contexts, in all of our schools, in all meetings, not just here at the board meeting, which you guys have done a fabulous job in the last year of bringing this in Spanish. We're going to have a workshop on February 1st called One Room, Many Voices. This is funded through contingency money we got from the McCune Foundation. The workshop's going to be facilitated by an organization called Just Communities. They trained a number of us, including Sal and a lot of your bilingual aides from the elementary schools in community interpreter training last summer. So anyways, this is an invitation to all of you on the board to hopefully come to this workshop on February 1st. I can pass around the flyer, and for the principals, Andy's going to tell you about that in formal channel, but I'm going to be trying to draw in the PTAs and any engaged bilingual or non-English speaking parents you have at your schools to talk about how to plan inclusive and effective multilingual meetings so that we can really hear from everybody and everybody can hear each other. So if
Great.
you
A time and a place.
February 1st, it's going to be right here in this room. It's going to be from 3 to 5 in the afternoon.
Oh,
So that was really all I wanted to tell you about. Thank you.
And please pass
Yeah.
a couple of those around.
Here, I'll give a few to Kathy to send around. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else want to speak before we begin? Okay. So our purpose for meeting this evening is to talk about the budget, and not for us to talk, but to sort of dive in and look at where we currently are spending money and how we feel about that, and whether it is the best way for us to be spending it, and whether our members of the public feel that we are spending it wisely. So we're hoping for input throughout tonight's process, and probably a second meeting February 28th, I think we said. So here we go. Andy has lots of information for us, which is available in the back, and I assume will be on our website.
It is.
So if you're at home and you want to look at it, it's on the website. I sent you a quick email, but I don't know if you got it. You know, obviously we don't want to just read through this since we're all capable of doing that on our own, but we have it here to support us in questions. Andy has it here to support his sort of topics, and we'll see where it all takes us. I'll let you begin.
Great. Thank you, Jane. So, as Jane said, there's about 37 or so pages there in the back, as well as I believe are already posted to our website. certainly not my intention that we'll be going through every page of every document, but I do want to highlight a little bit of a foundation for everyone. I think it's going to be a reminder primarily for the board who already is familiar, but for those in the audience as well as those at home, just a kind of base primer on school finance in California, then revenue as it comes to us at the district level, and then the majority of our conversation tonight will really be focused around expenditures. But prior to getting there, I thought it was important for us to talk about the revenue side. So I'm going to begin going through the packet. You'll see that section 1 was just I tried to provide 2 pages of the key terms. I'm not going to go over any of those terms right now, but as the night unfolds, if you hear a term like ADA and aren't sure what that is, then it may very well be listed on this glossary of terms. So going to section 2, history of school finance, there's only a couple things I want to point out here to lay the foundation. The first is that California back in the 70s became a state funded by revenue limits, which ultimately ended up leading to every district being funded pretty significantly differently, even if they had a similar student population. So that's really the prior funding model was revenue limit. 1978, Prop 13 passed, and that, as many of you know, is what limited the amount of income that can come from property taxes. So as a point of clarification, some still believe that the majority of funding for education comes from property taxes. That's not the case in California. It is the case in many other states, but for California, well over half of funding for schools come from the state through collections on income tax and sales tax. So Prop 13 capped what could be locally raised and made us far more reliant on Sacramento. What also happened with Prop 13 is we became a far more volatile funding system. Our budget is far more likely to go through peaks and valleys, because when you're based on your funding is based on income taxes, that can fluctuate so significantly with the economy, far more so than property taxes. Again, how most other states are funded, they are not on that same boom and bust cycle that we are in California. Prop 98 came about in the late 80s. That was what was supposed to set a minimum floor for education funding as a % of general fund revenue to the state. Unfortunately, what it's been used for is actually to create a ceiling, and in fact, in some years we haven't even met our Prop 98 target. But that was the next significant evolution. And then really that brings us actually, relatively few changes over about 40-year span until 2012 or so. So in 2012, it's when we had Prop 30 pass, which as a reminder was the addition of 3 new income tax brackets for the wealthiest Californians, as well as a 1/4-cent sales tax for the entire state. That sales tax actually just expired on December 31st. If you happen to have noticed, your sales tax has gone down when you go to the grocery store or elsewhere since January 1. So Prop 30 brought a significant increase in funds to education. Also think back to that time, that was as we were well past the bottom of the recession, really coming out, and so revenues began to pick up. And then we also changed the method in which those funds were distributed across school districts in the state. So again, revenue limits that had been around for nearly 40 years created great inequities between similarly situated districts. But LCFF came in. In addition on revenue limits, there's also 50 to 60 categorical programs where the state would give out small pots of money for very restricted uses. So that's one of the key terms of the night, is to understand the difference between a restricted fund or restricted revenue and an unrestricted revenue. Most simply, it's as it sounds, that the majority of our funds come to the district unrestricted, meaning we can use it for any allowable purpose. But there are many restricted funds that might come to us specifically for the purpose, like special education, where those funds must go towards special education. There formerly was restricted revenue around transportation that must be used for home to school transportation. That one has gone away significantly. But a number of the categoricals that existed over that time period was really Sacramento trying to dictate down to the local level how revenues best could be expended. LCFF tried to group that money together. Again, it was at that time that we had the influx in money as well, and try to give some local control to the way that we would be able to expend those funds, hence the name local control funding formula. They set out a base grant that all districts in the entire state would receive based on the grade span of that child. And then they have a couple add-ons. They have the supplemental grant and then the concentration grant. That is additional funding on top of the base level of funding for all students, and it's based on certain demographic factors that the governor and the legislature have identified as students who have a greater need for additional supports. Those students that qualify for that additional funding are students who are low socioeconomic level as identified by the free and reduced meal application, as well as English learners and foster youth. So those are the three categories of students who help the district receive a greater money on top of our base grant. We receive a 20% add-on from the base grant for each student who meets one of those three criteria. And we actually identify those as the unduplicated count. So if a student happens to be EL as well as free and reduced meal application, then they only count their district once as far as that supplemental money coming to the district. If a district has over 55% of their students meeting one of those three criterion, then you are able to qualify for what's called the concentration grant. Concentration grant provides for every student over that 55% threshold, you get a 50% add-on to the base grant. So if the base grant was $7,000 for each student over 55% who qualify, the district would receive $3,500 for those students. So a district like the many down in Oxnard that are in the 80% plus or minus range of unduplicated count pupils, they're receiving that same base grant we receive. They receive that supplemental grant, the same that we receive, although they get it on 80%, whereas we only get it on about 43%. That's our unduplicated count figure. They also will receive 25% of their students. That's, again, the difference between the 80% they're at minus the 55% threshold. So 25% of their students also generate an additional $3,500 to $4,000 per student. So that's why you still see very big disparities between the amount of funding that districts even in Ventura County receive. The goal with that additional funding is to provide additional supports for those students specifically, although there are many ways in which you can ultimately be providing those supports, and oftentimes other districts as well as our own has used some of those monies to reduce overall class size, as that has been a very significant factor identified as being a way in which we support students with higher needs is to have lower class sizes for those students. So that is from the 1970s to today how in general California schools are funded. We now receive our base grant, again adjusted based on grade span per ADA, with a supplemental add-on of 20% per student that qualifies in those three categories.
And 43% of our students are.
Exactly. So the last piece about LCFF is we currently are about halfway through the transition from base grants to full LCFF. So this is our implementation period. Again, all districts started at very different points 4 years ago when we began LCFF. And so even though you may even have seen numbers that will supposedly say what the base grant number is for districts, there's not a single district in the state that receives that actual amount just yet. Once we're at full implementation, that will be the amount that we receive per student per grade. But right now they're trying to do this, again, phase-in period of where we're all starting at different points, and each year they figure out what the gap is from where we are to where they'd like us to be, and they'll fund a portion of that gap. So each year we get slightly closer toward full implementation and full, the full amount of the base grant and supplemental grant coming to us. But currently that's not, the districts are not equalized yet by any means.
Annie, can you speak to how did we end up in this disparate situation among the different districts? And then when you say they want us to be at some level, who's they, and how do they determine where they want, quote, us to be?
So let me make sure I understand the question. The legislature ultimately approves the budget. Governor approves or vetoes what they've passed in the House or in the Assembly and the Senate. Each year in that budget, they identify where the full implementation LCFF amount would be.
But my point is, why are there districts at different stages of full implementation? It sounded like there's literally somebody going like, OI, we'll keep them at 70%. Will Los Altos, why? Why is there this distinction?
So it's because of where we started from. So let's say that for our district, we started at, in which, not just pulling this number out, we were about 65% of where they wanted us to ultimately be is where we were funded back in 12-13.
And then wanted us to be, what determined
Where
that?
the LCFF set a standard amount that all districts will receive in the state based on that base grant amount. So the base grant amount varies by grade span. The average, well, let's just say at K3, it's $7,700, including the grade span adjustment for lower in class sizes in K3. So the state has set $7,700 as the number that we will be at once we're at full implementation. But they didn't have the revenues at the time back in 2012 when LCFF was approved to just move every district to that amount immediately.
But are all districts at 7,700?
All districts will be at 7,700 as a base grant once we're at full implementation, correct, for K3.
And then why before this new LCFF scenario, were there these disparities wherever we were compared to some other district that's closer to full funding?
So that's where we go back to the many different both court and legislative actions back in the 60s and 70s that got us to the revenue limits. Revenue limits which were more heavily influenced by local revenues, property taxes,
Right.
prior to Prop 13, set the baseline that districts were receiving. So wealthier districts were receiving more because they had a great portion of their revenues coming to them from property taxes. Main court case, Serrano court case, which is briefly highlighted in your materials, set an attempt to try to equalize districts and not have such a significant gap between the wealthier areas and the the lower property tax value areas. And so they actually set formulas to try to eventually bring these districts together. And so they had different amounts. Again, each district was at a different starting point into their goal of where they wanted them to get to. They were trying to get everyone to within about $100 span of each other. And it was similar to this, a phase-in period of where each year they would change, each district's funding by a different amount to try to reach that target.
So even without LCFF, Serrano essentially had a similar regime where everyone was moving towards uniformity.
Serrano had a similar regime, and then a follow-up court case ended up saying what the state had done up to that point was sufficient, and they didn't have to take any greater strides toward trying to find parity of funding. Right. So going back to LCFF, we're halfway through the phase-in period. If a district like ours started at nearly 65% of the LCFF target amount, and a neighboring district was at 80%, then what they have funded each year is a percent of that gap. So in our case, 65% from 100, we're 35% of a gap. So 2 years ago, when the legislature funded 50% of the gap, we received a 17.5%. I know that once we start doing this many numbers, verbally it gets challenging, but they funded us 17.5%, whereas that district that was at 80 that only had 20% to go, they only got a 10% increase in funding. So because we're all at varying points on the spectrum toward implementation, we are receiving different amounts each year during this phase-in period. But again, once we get to full implementation, which is projected to be in 4 years, every district in the state, if they are not basic aid, if they are funded through LCFF, they'll receive that same LCFF base grant for each student based on their grade. So a second grader in Ojai receives the exact same base level of funding as a second grader in any other town in this state, and the only difference would be if that student had certain demographic background factors that granted them an additional funding for the district.
Or if they weren't a basic aid district.
Basic aid districts, there are about 100 districts in the state that are basic aid. Those are districts that have sufficient property tax revenue to not actually dip into the state funding formula. So correct, if a state or a district is basic aid, then they are not actually part of the LCFF formula because it's such a small number of districts, 100, but when you actually look at the enrollment in those districts, it's far less than it's well under 5% of all districts in the state are basic aid. So that's the unusual.
We're far away from
we're
that.
we're quite far from that. Yes, yes, absolutely. All right, so those were what I wanted to highlight on that section 2, history of school finance. Again, there's more information on some of the other iterations of what's impacted us to this day, but those were what I felt were most important. Any questions before I move on to specifically OUSD and its recent past?
Come on, you guys. Get in here. We're going to have trust falls if you don't watch out.
All right, so moving, more locally from talking about the state over a 40-year span, we'll look at OUSD over a 5-6 year span. Was I hearing some questions?
Can I just want, yeah, I'm sorry, I was frantically writing, and so I didn't hear you ask questions. I do have one question, I wanted to make sure I'm clear. 7,700 per student, is that per student in the district? That's where we want to get for the base grade. Is that the right number, is that right?
So, unfortunately, nothing's ever quite so easy. So they actually are they, the state, have set the LCFF target at 4 different levels based on grade span. So K3 receives one amount, and that's the one that's about $7,700 currently.
K3, okay.
And that includes an actual add-on that is, it is an add-on to try to reduce class sizes at the K3 level. Not quite the same as class size reduction dollars, but similar motive or theme. Then there's a second grade span from 4-6, which is lower. That one, actually, do you want to pull up the school services dartboard? We can get the exact numbers up. The 4-6 grade span, then there's 7-8, and then the 9-12 grade span. So 4 separate grade spans, so a student in those spans will all receive the same funding, but a kindergartner generates different revenue than a high schooler.
Okay, and is that information somewhere?
We will have it posted to the website tomorrow, and we will have it as a hard copy for our next meeting.
Perfect, thank you, that's important information.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yep. It's the school services dartboards right there. We'll pull up let's look at the 16-17 adopted. So, do you want to read off the numbers real quick for the 4 grade spans?
Sure. K to 3 is 7,083.
Do with the grade span adjustment.
Strike that. 7,820. 4 to 6, 7,189. 7 to 8, 7,403. 9 to 12, 8,801.
So again, key factor, we're not there yet, but that's what we're building toward, and supposedly in 4 years we'll be at full implementation. That will be the exact, again, same dollar figure that if you're in Ojai, Simi Valley, or, well, if you're in the Bay, maybe in Basic Aid District, but
Is the gap
Sacramento.
17.5%?
What's that?
Is our gap 17.5%?
No, our gap currently, we're at 96% of implementation,
Okay.
so we only have 4% to go. But we have 4% to go from the current target, but each year the target adjusts based on the COLA.
Okay.
So in 16-17 it didn't adjust because for the first year in decades we had no COLA, it was the un-COLA year. But typically we see a 1 to 2% increase in COLA, which then shoots that target a little bit further ahead.
We're going into advertising over here, the
About to
Uncola.
say, the Uncola undid itself.
Correct. That's one of the glossary terms.
Okay, got it.
Andy, as far as attendance, and I don't know if you know this off the top of your head, but do you see, as far as a pattern as progression for the student? My thought is that, and this is just me from the outside looking in, there's a lot of private high schools. So do you see where the student will go up to, let's say junior high, and then all of a sudden they don't continue on to Nordhoff, or is it pretty steady as far as, the students that start, they typically will go all the way through high school?
You're saying specifically for our district?
Yeah, for our district, yeah.
So the general trend over the past 4 to 5 years has been about a 10% loss of a particular grade between 8th grade to 9th, or a particular cohort between 8th grade and 9th grade. So our cohorts currently are somewhere between 180 and 220 students, depending on the year. So what we'd see is about 20 students who do not continue on to Nordhoff. We know that about 5 or 6 are going to Thatcher. That's Thatcher's general goal is in that mid-single digits. We have about 10 students or so going to Villanova the past few years, and then El Camino or other locations are taking a few others, and we certainly also are receiving some, and so that was a net number as far as 10% change between the cohort size in 8th to 9th.
That's actually fairly small compared to a lot of places in the country. I mean, you might see, 20% in some places that have a historic, particularly those that have a very high parochial school population and number of schools. We have Villanova, not others.
Right.
So.
Okay.
Don't we get a bump up though for 7th and 8th? It seems like a lot of the private elementary schools end. And then, I mean, just anecdotally, it seems like a lot of kids that I know were in private schools go to
Actually, we have seen some.
Matilla.
We have seen some in some years, yes.
And then they might leave after Matilla, but
We do get some.
All right. So next section is OUSD revenue. Before we actually dive into numbers, want to differentiate between 4 categories of funds that you receive. So, as my prior section stated in its first paragraph, across the entire country, all schools are ultimately funded by some combination of federal, state, and local revenues. What differentiates one state from the other is just the proportion of each of those funding sources. So for us, the far and away largest contributor toward our funds, you can see the LCFF sources, that first category of funds. Just so you know, each of our budgets that we release, both our adoption as well as interim revisions, will also categorize our revenues by these 4 large categories. So LCFF sources, which includes property tax, actually is part of the LCFF calculation, part of that broad first category. This category is completely unrestricted revenue. So again, it can be used for any legally authorized purpose for the school district. Federal revenue is the next category. Federal revenue is almost always restricted. The feds do not typically provide money to local education without having some string attached. The most common strings they attach are either supporting special education, money that's coming as a result of the IDEA, Act for Individuals with Disabilities, as well as they provide money for Title I, which is a funding source that's focused on students with low socioeconomic, or with, again, needs, and so low socioeconomic demographic backgrounds or factors. They also will provide some restricted money towards staff development. So that's the second source of money. Third source, other state revenues. For those who have attended our board meetings in the past few years when we talked about budget, and as a reminder to the board, I know that we've talked about this one a number of times, that big dollar amount that's been coming to us lately, the one-time dollars that the governor has been reauthorizing each year in some form, comes to us in this category of funds. So you can see that between 13-14, 14-15, it had dipped significantly. And then the past 2 years is when we saw those really significant increases in one-time funding.
And where's that money coming? Why is just the state is flush with income tax? I mean, the state is suddenly saying we have more money, so we're gonna spend more in education.
So there's a few reasons that's coming to us in this form. First, anytime the state imposes a new mandate on us, a new requirement that we, for instance, a year ago were required to provide training to all staff, additional training that meets their standards for annual mandated reporter training. That obviously comes at a cost to us. By fulfilling their mandate, one that no one would object to, but by having this new expectation on us of following their training annually, and then tracking and everything else, there's a cost associated with that because the employee is going to be in the paid status when they go through that training. legally, the state's actually is supposed to provide funding when they have a new mandate on us to do something that wasn't previously expected in that way.
Do they keep paying it, or is it they just pay it that year?
Well, so here's the thing, is that there are many different mandates that have come down from the state over the years. And for a long time, there were some consulting groups that would make very nice, pretty penny, nice revenue by coming to all the districts and saying, you already have more to do than you're funded. They make you fill out this form to get your reimbursement. It's iffy if they're even going to reimburse it. Don't waste your own time. Let us be the ones to submit the forms for you. And so districts were having these firms submit their mandated cost reimbursement form or claim, and the state just refused to pay out on any of these claims over a number of years. And so it eventually mounted to the point where we, as well as most other districts in the state, just no longer even submitted the claims because it was a time-consuming process for something that we were not seeing any return from the state on. So the governor, he has a few other motives, but actually this one-time funding has been coming to us in exchange for us relinquishing any legal right we have to that backlog of mandated cost claims. So there are a few districts in the state that have refused that one-time funding because they believe that their amount owed under the mandated cost program or claim program is greater than the one-time funding that we've received. But most districts have no idea what that number actually is and feel even if they did know, it wouldn't be worth trying to bail us out in court because the state has won every challenge to this reimbursement process in the past. So these one-time dollars are actually, Governor Brown is kind of double dipping, giving them to us unrestricted and saying that's, new money to education, but really it's going to pay down that debt, which is a major priority of the governor, is paying down debts as much as he can. So that's one reason. The other thing is that he really hates to have ongoing liabilities, that any new liability. And so by having it come to us as a one-time payment, it actually delays the time before it actually becomes part of the Prop 98 calculation, that calculation we briefly mentioned in the prior section, of where it becomes an ongoing commitment that goes to the school. So by him having it come to us that way and keeping it out of the LCFF formula, it just prolongs a little bit before it actually catches up to the state's budget and becomes a ongoing, part of the calculation.
So have they eliminated a lot of those mandated programs, or are they still there?
The programs are still there.
So it's unrestricted, restricted money, basically.
No, it's unrestricted. It's unrestricted money that he's.
Required to do the mandated things that we were supposed to get the money for in the first place. Right, correct. Another thing that comes out of this third pot of money is lottery. So a lot of times you might hear people ask questions about, either how much money from lottery is coming to the districts and, what can that be used for. Lottery comes to us in two separate forms. One is an unrestricted amount, which is in the amount of about $140 per student. That's correct, right? The other is as first one's unrestricted, can be used for anything. The second pot is only about $43 per student, and that's restricted. It has to be used on textbook and materials or curriculum. So in total, it comes to less than $200 and amounts to less than 2% of our actual budget comes to us from lottery revenue. So lottery certainly, while we appreciate the money and it is important to us, is not a significant contributor to.
It's sold as a big supporter of education.
Exactly. But yeah, in reality, and not just for our district, for all districts, because it's all based on the same calculation. Every district receives the same per pupil amount for lottery.
And could you go back a little bit on the, I know we've talked about it before at meetings, but these mandates that Brown is sort of paying for in the way that Kelly just talked about.
Right.
What are those mandates? Can you talk about some of the programs?
Can you think of top of your head?
Isn't it educator and section head one of the other state revenues that came in?
Yeah, but that wouldn't be part of the mandated cost. I can't think of them off the top of my head.
Armadas?
My wife and I are playing a drinking game where she has to drink when you get something wrong.
Oh my my gosh, she's gonna be mad at you.
Which I didn't think would happen all night long. Nothing really.
When he says, I don't know, everybody's so stunned. I don't get past that point.
Thank you.
No problem.
No, I do apologize. That will be another thing that we'll add to the website
I know
materials
we've talked
tomorrow,
about it.
but-
I mean, I'm as guilty as anyone because I know we've talked about it.
Well, the single plan, isn't that a requirement?
Yeah, that would be, and that would definitely be an example of mandated cost, or mandated program.
Right. And even the LCF stuff that Maryland does for us, right? is
LCAP has been
LCAP.
argued whether or not that would qualify. I don't actually know if that's settled, if that is part of the mandated cost. But there are lists out there of all the different ones over the years. I'll put that together. Or hopefully we'll find someone else who's put it together and I'll just publish it. So state revenues, those would be the largest though, would be, or the other state revenues would be the mandated cost reimbursement, the lottery, and then the other actual one that's in here recently is the CTE monies that we've received. We've received 2 different grants. We're part of a consortium with the county, and so our VC Innovate money and CTE incentive grant have come through this category of revenues.
And are those, Andy, I'm sorry, are those under the 2016, 2017? Are those included in that third category there?
Yes, they are.
They are, okay.
All right, and then the last category of other local revenues. The biggest one here would be donation accounts. So anything that, and when we actually, what we call a donation account, I think most probably would not necessarily agree with that term. Obviously, it's the things that we would think of as donation when the PTO or OEF or a service organization donates funds to the district. That would be in this category of funds, but also anything that ends up getting billed back to another party. So certainly that would apply to the after-school program at Miramani, where Miramani PTO puts on the program, but we actually are the ones who are having the payroll run through the district office for those staff. Then we invoice the PTO. Not exactly a donation, and we have a clear expense directly tied to the dollar amount that we're invoicing for, but that's the category of funds that that'd be considered. Even actually when we bill certain things back to the county, some of those also come in as a donation, even though again it's not actually a donation, but it's a chargeback or a bill back to another party.
And also in that then would be like when we make donations for field trips and stuff, right?
Right. So again, some things that are true donations, and other things that ultimately bring us to the full nearly $500,000 figure that it normally ends up being. That would not be what most would consider a true donation.
Yeah, I know we talked about like the Chromebooks.
Exactly. Right.
Roll through that way too.
Correct. That's correct. Our preschool also is part the preschool tuition, which is about $125,000 a year, comes to us in this category of funds. Rental income, including the skate park income, comes to us in this category, as well as.
Does the charter school go through this?
So that was what I was actually just trying to think. Do you recall our indirect charges or administrative fee that we charge to them? Does that come in? Yeah. So we do charge an administrative fee for processing their payroll, for being their administrative arm of the charter. And so separate from our oversight fee, which the oversight as the chartering body, we receive 1%, but the administration fee is about 10%. And yeah, that would be in this category. All right, so that's the description of these different revenue categories. The key takeaways I wanted to highlight on this page. You can see that overall our total revenue increased from 22 million back in 11-12 up to 26 million plus this year. But note that the majority of that change occurred in LCFF. So 13-14 was the first year of LCFF, and that's where you see that pretty big increase in a single year from 14 up to 17 million. And you can see that we continue to have significant increases over the past few years. I have an LCFF revenue projection at the bottom of the page. You'll see that the acceleration is slowing. That the gap funding that we talked about earlier, as we get closer toward full implementation, that we do not see nearly the same increases in LCFF revenue in these coming years as we were receiving in these prior. So if you look at the halfway down the page, one thing I found interesting when I was looking at these numbers, you can see the overall increase in funding we received during this time span was 18.6%. However, the increase that we received per student was over double that, was 37%. So what that means is that because of our declining enrollment, that we have not been able to realize nearly the same absolute increase in revenues that we otherwise would have, and that the other districts around us have been able to experience because they've not dealt with nearly the same decline in enrollment. So 37% on a per student basis, but because of the significant drop, more than 10% over the past 4 or 5 years, that we have not, again, seen the absolute dollar increase by nearly that much.
And can I ask you, this is jumping way ahead, I'm sure, but my mind goes, 18%, but our staff hasn't received 18% raise over this amount of time period. But that 18% covers, right, our electricity bill is higher, our health insurance bills are higher, so everything is higher. So even though we're receiving more, it's not necessarily meaning we have.
Didn't it also bring back furlough days?
Right, so that, I think that's an important point. When we've talked about the increases that our staff have seen over the past couple of years, I believe appropriately so, we've never discussed the restoration of furlough, or we rarely discuss the restoration of furlough days as part of the salary enhancement during this time period, because that was simply getting us back to zero, or the starting line from a couple of years prior to 11-12. But if you are looking at it from an absolute standpoint of dollars in the pockets of staff between 11-12 and 16-17, we actually have seen the restoration of the furlough days from that time period where we're down to 175 days, the 8 furlough days. That was about a 4% salary increase once we restored those fully last year from its bottom. Mm-hmm. So 4% there plus the 2.5% on schedule last year and the 4% this year. We are, double-digit increases that staff have seen from the salary, settlements of recent years. Additionally, it's important to remember that all staff are on a salary schedule, and so, whereas some staff who've been with the district for a longer period of time are in the longevity steps, which we'll get to in a few minutes, but many of our staff do see still a increase in pay based on the salary schedule year over year.
Can I ask a question, Andy?
Yes.
So, my understanding is 2011-2012 school year kind of serves as the bottoming out of the financial crisis, or kind of when our schools were at their worst point financially. So I'm wondering and I kind of look at this timeline as, and I think LCFF was used to give money back to schools that had been lost during the recession. Is that accurate?
So the goal of LCFF was never actually to fund schools adequately. We wish that was the case, but no one has that delusion that will be funded adequately. It was to return us to the 07-08 year, plus a consumer price indexing or a COLA equivalent to make it current dollars. But it really was based off of trying to bring things simply back to pre-recessionary cuts.
So I think it would be really helpful to have the 07-08 numbers if they're not.
Sure, we can put those together. We can add that to her.
Hank refers to 07-08 as the bait and switch that got him here.
Yeah.
That's fabulous. I'll take the job.
They were honest. I knew what was going on.
So it sounds like the best thing we can do for our district is to convince everybody in Ojai to become foster parents. And, it would kill 2 birds with 1 stone, right? Helping the foster kids and helping the district? Okay.
Would do both those things,
Okay.
absolutely.
All right. we'll work
You wanna
on
take that one on?
it. My house is kind of full right now, but the rest of you can clean.
Wait a minute, one of them went to college.
He's home right now, so it's full again.
I don't have anything further on this revenue page, unless there are questions,
Can
we'll.
I ask one additional question? I noticed, so basically, the LCFF revenue is basically equates to our OUSD annual, all of the money that OUSD pays for salary per year, at least in this school year. So it's about a $20 million number. And
Right.
then I'm wondering if you can talk to us about that number in the context of other school districts. Would other school districts be receiving, the way that I look at it is we are getting all of our revenue for our teachers via LCFF, and I wonder if that's the situation for other school districts.
So, I think you're spot on that the numbers are very close to one another, our total personnel expenditures and LCFF revenue. I do want to distinguish though that they're not directly correlated or tied, because a number of the federal revenues, again, federal especially being for special ed, $1 million plus coming to us to fund special education services, which are almost exclusively personnel. So we certainly have personnel who are being charged to other accounts. But you're correct though that in general, the LCFF revenue sources and our personnel costs are very similar. I don't know actually how that relates. There's another. How that relates to other districts. What I can say is that as far as our personnel, percent of overall budget relative to or percent of personnel to our overall budget, we're 85 to 86%. The average across the state is in the 80s, with the county being 84 to 85%. We're a tick above the county average on percent of personnel relative to the overall budget.
Oh, closer than we thought. I thought they were closer to like 81.
No, they're 84 to 85, we're 85 and a half, 86.
Personnel isn't just certificated teachers though.
Oh, that's, absolutely correct, yeah. That would include all staff.
All staff.
And actually, there's a couple, very few situations where we have staff, John Walker would be an example, he's our director of our personnel commission, who actually doesn't appear as a personnel expense. And the typical personnel expenditures, he's actually coded as an independent contractor, but he is truly is a district employee, as opposed to our attorneys, are not district employees, they are contractors.
Sorry.
No.
I didn't raise my hand.
I was just gonna say, do you know what that percentage is for the certificated, as a percentage of the total budget?
She has the exact percent. I'll say that roughly speaking, it's,
Certificate versus classified, what's the?
well, why don't you pull up the budget that has the, all three, management, classified, and
Okay.
the actual budget document. Or here, I'll pull it up right here. Let me give you a better number, more accurate number than me approximating.
And while you're looking, just to clarify, not knowing and being wrong are two
Right,
different things.
absolutely.
I didn't,
But as far as Oslo's concerned, they're all the same.
I got such.
You already drank
It's Oslo's the problem.
In fact, she said, Kevin, make sure Hank asks Andy a bunch of really hard questions he doesn't know the answers to.
Yeah, I thought of that and I was like, they don't want to hear from me again. But it was, you're right.
So teachers are about 59% of total compensation. Classified CCA positions are about 27%. Management's about 14%.
And do you know where that stacks us against the other districts?
I actually did a little banging around at other districts and that seemed pretty average.
Okay.
I was definitely hoping, I'd find some huge disparity. I didn't.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with Kevin. In the average zone, I would say that our district, when you're looking at overall revenues, including restricted, we are a little bit higher on the classified side. And that's a direct relationship to our special education program and knowing that we have a population, special education population that's higher than the county average. And so that is a program that is, obviously personnel driven and frequently we'll have the one-to-one instructional assistance. And so our classified side is, on the upper end of that average
That's
spectrum.
because we have the need for it though.
Exactly, absolutely, absolutely.
Andy?
Yeah.
It's just gonna bother me, CTE money, I can't remember CTE, what does it stand for?
CTE, it's actually in the glossary, it's Career Technical Education. So it used to be voc ed. I'm not sure exactly why the nomenclature's changed, but actually, Greg, do you know why is there a distinction between voc ed and CTE?
I think it's just funding.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So basically, so that if it's not classified as that ROTC or.
Right.
That kind of,
RRP, yeah.
Excuse me. ROTC. But, yeah.
Yeah.
You're dating yourself.
Yeah, ROP, voc ed, now CTE is the, they've changed the term, but it's the same, concept
We
of.
still must have RTC, right?
Yeah, in some places.
Okay, thank you.
We did.
All right. Seeing no other questions, we'll move on to the next section. Benefits and salary schedules. So this is an important one, or important section to make sure that we understand when we're talking about personnel cost, and when you see the figures in the following section, that we understand what this is actually, relating to. In this section of your packet, I have 2 pages that have been recently created that give an explanation of benefits. Then after that, it simply has our salary schedules for all staff. But, if we go to page 12 of the packet, you'll see the certificated salary schedule. The salary that you see listed on the schedule is very different than obviously what the employee sees in their take-home check, because there's a number of different deductions. And it's also very different what the district actually pays to employ that staff member. So going back to page 10, the first page in this section, you'll see that we have to, as a district, pay benefits for our employees, many of which are a percent calculated off of their salary. So for certificate staff, STRS, the state teacher retirement system, Medicare, state unemployment, work comp are the four ones that may apply to them, although some certificate staff actually may not be members of STRS, and subs typically are not members of STRS either. Classified staff, they actually have one additional one in addition to having a different pension system, but classified staff do pay into Social Security as well, and district has to pay the Social Security for them. So you can see that approximately for classified staff, it's about a 25% add-on in addition to their salary for what the actual cost of the staff member is. And then we are one of the few districts in the county that still provides a full employer contribution toward medical for our staff who qualify. For teachers, they must be a full-time teacher to receive the full employer contribution. If they're part-time, there's a few different types of arrangements that may be made, but most simply, they end up getting a prorated share based on if they work less than their full-time equivalency.
Can I ask you a question about that?
Sure.
So, do they choose between the PPO, the HMO, or?
Do staff?
Yeah.
Correct. A staff member who qualifies for benefits has the option of any of the 3 plans.
And why do we offer three options?
Why do we offer?
I mean, obviously, one is almost $2,000 per person cheaper per year times how big is our staff? And just a question. I mean,
The rationale, I think there's
I know it was
maybe 2
before
different
your time.
questions in there. Why do we have multiple plans, and why do we fund all of the plans equally, or why are we going to have a full employer contribution? The reason we offer multiple plans is obviously it's a clear benefit for staff to have multiple options, and there are trade-offs with the PPO compared to going to HMO. The HMO is going to have a more restricted pool of doctors or medical providers that you can go to. but the actual monetary benefit is enhanced, is better. So we offer options, especially up in Ojai Valley, where we don't have a nearby Kaiser Permanente facility, to have staff who live in the valley have multiple options with their insurance coverage. The reason that we allow them to choose and we will fund any of the three options is that we've bargained for that in each of the collective bargaining agreements based on FTE. If they qualify for full medical benefits, then we will fund the plan of their choosing.
And then to go to the bottom,
Sorry.
So I get the less than 4 hours, 4 to 5. What if they're working 6 hours but only 3 days a week?
So this is assuming a 5-day work week. So yeah, so if, what this actually works out to be is if they're less than 20 hours a week, which is the 4 times 5, is that first category and so on. So I apologize, that would be a good clarification to have on there. But no, it's based on a 5-day equalized work schedule. So we do have some employees who work 6 hours a day, 4 days a week, but on Wednesday, the early out day, they work only 5 hours. In that case, even though they're 6 hours, 4 days a week, because they're 29 overall, they wouldn't qualify for the bronze plan contribution.
What I was gonna say was, it looks to me like if we didn't offer the PPO and the HMO, for any teacher in Ojai, they wouldn't have an option, because you can't get Kaiser if you live in Ojai, is my understanding. So if we took away that option, all the teachers in Ojai really don't have any options.
If they can't get it, why is it an option? It's gotta be an option.
Well, it's an option if you don't live in Ojai.
You mean
So
you live
any
in-
teachers.
I think
that-
maybe you're saying it's a practical option. You can live in Ojai and have Kaiser Permanente.
Can you?
Yes, as an employer,
As
you
an employer,
can't.
another place.
As an employer, you can't provide it. I don't think.
And how are we providing?
Because we're through, isn't this all part of the public, what was Kevin, the big thing we talked about with Danny about the insurance, right?
Yeah, it's the self-funded.
Yeah, so,
Yeah.
isn't that what
SIS.
this is, or not?
Which all three of these are CISC options. Actually, all four, sorry, the bronze plan
Because
as well.
that's not Ojai, that's
Oh,
the state.
So we are, as Ojai, aren't considered the employer. Is that what you're saying? basically?
Well, our
Because we're
health
pooled with
benefits.
somebody else, then we can offer it.
We do have residents who staff members who reside in Ojai who are Kaiser members.
Okay. I stand corrected.
I'm not sure if
If
there's,
you're
I don't know if
trying-
the distinction is technically actually for those who will be receiving their W-2 soon, Ventura County Office of Ed is technically our tax employer ID and that's why our county superintendent is who actually signs our paychecks. So I'm not sure, maybe because county is our employer, technically, if that makes a difference, but we do offer all three of these plans to all staff, and staff have
And
been able to
anyone
enroll.
in Ojai can enroll in Kaiser. Okay, I didn't realize that.
Question, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe there's an additional benefit for staff members or teachers that retire from, I think, 55 to 65, where the insurance is covered. Is that the same amount that the district then has to continue paying, the amount that is shown on here, or is there a percentage of that?
Well, you're correct. So just to make sure everyone knows what we're talking about, we are a district that still provides post-employment benefits. The actual rate is slightly different. The insurers provide a different rate based on retiree or a current employee. But the concept is the same, which is that an employee who qualifies for post-employment benefits with the district receives a full employer contribution for their benefits.
And is that rate higher or lower?
It's close. Do you have you just email it to me today?
Yeah.
They're very close to one another. They
So
just
about the
they're
same.
not the same rates. I mean, but they do not differ by more than $1,000, I don't believe.
Do you know offhand how many of our teachers within like the next 5 to 10 years are gonna be getting to that, where they can retire? Because I know we have a lot of teachers that have been, we've been fortunate that have been with the district for a long time. I'm just curious.
Yeah.
A lot.
We do not have a projection internally that would point toward, you know, it's such a personal decision, something that, you know, we can't, it's not directly tied to, you know, years of service. There's no point at which an employee would need to elect that option, and so, you know, yeah, we don't have an
But
internal
I'm buying
projection
some
on that.
chains and locks, and I'm not gonna let them go.
Well, I think
I
the
don't
thing
think
to
you can afford to let them
remember,
go.
It's actually just down further.
we talk about people retiring at 55,
Retiree rate.
people don't retire at 55 anymore. We used to be able to retire at 55 and get a full payout on our retirement, but now people you have to be 61 or 61, I believe. So, and most people, you know,
They need that additional income.
they need that, so it doesn't turn out to be a 10-year payout to people. It's gonna
It'll
be
be,
more like.
it'll be different for each situation.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
And we're younger and more vital.
I know, 65 is the, you know, the new
That's so young.
58, 5. I don't know.
Oh, look at me.
Thank you. What is it?
I like that 65, yeah, it's the new 45.
So again, just to make sure we understand, for classified staff, works out to be roughly about 25% add-on. For certificate staff or STRS members, about 16% add-on for the, what we call statutory benefits. And then on top of that, there's the health and welfare, based on number of hours you work and whether or not you qualify. So the following page, I've given a few examples just to really drive home the way in which these calculations function. You can see in my first example, a 3-hour custodian with no prior PERS experience, so that's an important distinction. Any employee who works at least 4 hours with us, we must pay into PERS and they receive that benefit. If you work less than 4 hours, we do not pay into PERS for that position unless the person is a pre-existing PERS employee from prior employment. So if they previously were a PERS member, then we would be paying PERS on them, but in my hypothetical here, they were not, and so I just want to draw out that point. You can see that, you know, for our really part-time positions, of which we have many in the district, there's a very little gap between the actual salary they receive, or gross salary they receive, and the total district cost. Full-time senior accounting assistant, this would be an example of a full-time classified employee who does have the PERS and Social Security contributions with also qualifying for health and welfare. You can see in this case that the total cost of the employee is in excess of $25,000 more than the actual salary schedule amount listed. And then you see the similar concept for a teacher, and the next example and the last example was just to draw out that point that a part-time teacher has, again, a few different options, but most simply put, that would be the prorated contribution from the district for their medical. So in this case, someone receiving the HMO, PPO, district would have $12,800 expenditure. So you can see how that works out.
And I'm sorry, just because I just thought of it going back on this health and welfare, the board is offered the same 3 options, members of the board?
Any questions on anything in this section 4, either the explanation of statutory benefits and health and welfare or salary schedules? One thing actually I will point out on salary schedules, just a point of clarification, for the classified schedule, which is listed on page 15. For this schedule, you'll see that we have an hourly rate listed as well as a monthly amount listed. This monthly amount actually only ties out for 12-month employees. Well, and certainly.
I'm sorry, what page are you on?
15.
Page 15. So you'll see that for each of the steps and the ranges that there's 2 numbers listed per box. the box has an amount that is in the thousands and an amount that's in the double digits. That's an hourly rate and then a monthly rate, assuming the person is a full-time 12-month employee.
And what is this range, 60 down to 12?
Great question. So if you go to the precinct page 14, you can see all of the classifications we have within the classified service and where that position falls on the salary schedule. So if we were looking at a hypothetical secretary to the high school principal, you'll see that they are in range 31. They're part of the clerical and secretarial series. So that's that first column of positions. Range 31, you turn to the next page to see where their hourly rate would be. Assuming the individual came to the district with no relevant experience, they'd be starting at step 1. So the clarifying point I was going to make here is that the monthly amount that you'll see, so again, sticking with our example of range 31, step 1, that individual will be making $16.58 an hour, and then you see that $28.74 monthly amount listed. That would not actually be what that employee would be making per month. Again, to simplify, and actually something that I'm looking at and working with CSEA on potentially changing in the future is having different salary schedules for 10, 11, and 12-month employees. 10-month employees, just actually as a reminder for certificate staff, their annual amount is divided by 184 days if you want to get their daily rate. They have 184 days that they actually are, working. 180 instructional days, the 4 non-instructional. I want to make one clarification because we have a few teachers in here. You guys work way more than 184 days. We all know that.
I was already planning. Well done.
Many
I've heard
more
this,
days.
so you better add that on.
But do they get paid over 12 months or over 10 months?
They get paid over 10 months. They have the option to do a summer savings and have it divided over 12 payments. But the standard would be 184 days of pay divided by 10 months, have it template to them. So in the same situation, a classified employee who's working the same instructional calendar year has 180 instructional days that they too would be working. Rather than 4 staff development or non-instructional days, classified employees receive 1. But the distinction is that they do actually receive a few additional add-ons. They receive 13 days of holiday pay. So now instead of being 181 days, it'd be 194 days that their number would be divided by to go from an annual down to a monthly rate or a daily rate. But they also actually have their vacation that gets paid out. And so without going into the full detail of each year that one works with us and what their rights are to vacation leave, at the highest range, once an employee's been with us for more than 10 years, so 11 years or more, they are entitled to 2 days per month of vacation leave, although again, they don't actually take vacation, it just is paid out to them. So in that scenario, an employee's been with us for at least 11 years who's an instructional staff member, a paraeducator, a nutrition service worker, a office manager, although they're slightly extended schedule, but instructional 10, 11-month calendars would be the 194 days, which again was that 181 plus the 13 holidays, plus then their 20 vacation days they have a right to, and so you're actually looking at 213 days being the number of days that they receive compensation for. So going back to this schedule, if that school secretary were making $16.58 an hour for 8 hours in a day, you would do $16.58 times the 8 hours in a day times the 213 days, or 214 days, gets you their total annual amount, and then you divide that by 10 to get their monthly pay they receive.
So 2 questions about that. I mean, 13 holidays, that includes the summer, so even though, I'm right, I mean, that we're talking
And it
about.
receives everything except the summer. July 4th is the only holiday that we have outside of the school year.
Okay. And then in terms of the vacation days, if they take the days,
They don't have the option. They don't actually accrue vacation. They have that become an add-on to their salary. The only days that our classified instructional 10 and 11-month employees may take would be either sick leave, or we have a few other types of leave, personal necessity, personal leave.
so what happens if, they're really sick and they're gone for 3 weeks? That's.
So sick leave accrues year over year, so any unused sick leave would go to the following year. If one does fully utilize their sick leave, all classified employees have what's called a right to the other entitlement, or it's a 50%, it's a half pay for 100 days. Certificated staff have a similar right, rather than it be 50% of their regular pay, they get what's called differential pay, or it's the difference between their regular pay and the cost of their sub. So if a certificate or classified employee were out for more than what they had sick leave granted to them for, they'd be using that leave, they wouldn't be using vacation, if they're 10 or 11 month. 12 month, totally different, they actually do have vacation earned and they're able to take vacation days.
And then can you go back actually to the certificated salary schedule? I understand this, the step 1 through 13, and then there's a 1 through 5. Is that's a year? What is that at the top?
So, great question. So we're on page 12. The way this is our certificated salary schedule. The way to read this is we actually, again, as we talk about this, we constantly are seeing ways to improve, and I think that one improvement might be that actually the heading that we have below the the financial or numerical amounts would probably be better placed at the top. And so you can see that each column has a description of that column following the salaries listed. So for step 1, Roman numeral 1, that first column, it actually is tied to, at the bottom you'll see it's for someone who has a credential and just their BA degree. As you move over to step 2, it's credential with BA degree plus 15 graduate level units. Step 3, credential BA degree plus 30, and moving over, eventually you see step 5 is for our staff who have a credential, have their BA plus 60 semester units or 90 quarter units. So that's how our certificate staff are placed on a salary schedule. The columns, the left to right movement is based on education level. The rows or the movement down is based on experience.
So just a BA, you get nothing until you have 16 years?
Correct.
Wow, I was not remotely aware of that.
Mm-hmm.
That's pretty
Yeah, so you can see actually.
Very unusual for us to have. There are a few in that category, but it's very rare to have someone 15 plus years with a BA. It can happen, but it's not normal. We have a huge percentage of our staff in the lower right-hand corner. Andy, you did a scattergram.
Right.
Very, very significant in the longevity group and columns 4 and 5, mostly 5.
Right, so note that all staff, unless they're starting in column 5, starts at that same amount if they don't come to the district with experience. 482, 491, if they only have that credential and BA degree, they stay there exactly as Kevin said until longevity, although as Hank said, rare occurrence. Step 2, that same employee, if all they have is the BA degree plus 15, they're staying at that same number for 4 years, but by year 5 they're able to begin to see the increase. Column 3, you still see that same number is repeated for just at least the first year into the second year, and then they begin seeing the increase, and at column 4 they start seeing the increases immediately. But
And that
important
15
to note,
is teaching experience?
I'm sorry?
15 semesters of teaching, or?
No, those are semester hours.
Those are
education.
post-bachelor,
Post, got it,
Right.
got it.
post-undergrad
I thought it was like
credits.
in-class experience or something, but it's,
No.
yeah, got it.
So I think that is actually a great clarifying point that we brought up, is that I think that the assumption at times is that all staff see the increases year over year when they're on a salary schedule. And you can see here that we have a number of staff, even in the first 13 steps, who do not receive a salary enhancement year over year. With certainty, once they hit step 13, they certainly don't. After that, they only receive increases every few years. You can see the increments listed, year 16, 20, 25, 30. And that's based on, again, their longevity with the district.
So is step 1 actually year 1, year 2, year 3?
Correct. Correct.
Can I-
Assumed.
can I like to know as well? The other thing that I think is important to know is that if a teacher wanted to go to a different district, most districts only give you 5 years. So you may have 20 years' experience, but you bump down to step 5 if you leave your district. That's why many teachers don't ever choose to leave after a number of years, because it's like, well, gosh, I was making this much over here, And even though the salary schedule's better at Oxnard or better at Ventura, I'm only gonna get 5 years' experience, so I'm gonna get bumped right back to there, which is one of the things, it's one of the reasons why people can never leave, is, not that they don't, not that we want to.
It's how we
I'm
trap
not
you
saying
in.
that. I'm just trying to explain
Other
why
districts
people
use that
don't.
same? Do other districts treat other teachers coming from various districts the same? Like, is that a policy that's?
So each district is autonomous and able to make their own policy decision. In fact, I would say our district is one of the more generous to, recruit the best teachers we can. We do often allow more years of service credit to come with them than most other districts. But there is some, I absolutely agree with Angie that overall it's about 5 years, but there is variance among districts that, some give 3 or 4 and there are some that might give 7 or 8. But I think 5 to 6 is the average.
5 is,
the median.
5 around there is average. That's why we often hear, well, if you're not happy, go to another district and, then you can get paid greater. You can go to Santa Barbara, you can go to wherever, you just have to drive. But that's part of the reasons why people don't leave, is because, well, yeah, I can go there, but I'm gonna drop right back down to step 5. And, so, no, why would you do that? It'd be crazy. So, I just thought that was just a general idea.
Yeah, that's a good point. Any questions on salary schedule, benefits?
Can I ask a question? Sorry, I had to take a call. About our health and welfare. We don't have family listed here. Don't families cost more?
No, so that's a great question, and that's something that I'm working right now with Syscon to get different options, so that way we can evaluate if it makes sense to continue on this single rate system. But currently for medical, there's no differentiation if someone is 23 and single, or if they are 31 and have a spouse and 2 children. The rate to the district is the exact same. For vision and dental, those are 3-tier, or I'm sorry, actually only dental is. Dental is a 3-tier system where the district only pays for the employee, and if the employee elects to have dependents on covered, then they're picking up the cost of the difference between the additional, the 2-party or full family plans and the district contribution of the one-party plan. But for medical, no, we only see a single rate for current staff. We do differentiate on retirees. So going back to Sal's question, for the post-employment benefits, retiree does actually receive a different rate structure between 1-party, 2-party, full family.
I thought when we had that pencil out of the school board cost, that some board members had up to 19 or 18,000 for medical. It seemed like there was a differentiation.
Do the CISC count board members as the same as retirees, do you know?
No, they count them the same as an active employee, but.
I think that it may have been in part due to having at least a former employee that was.
Does anyone remember that?
A retiree.
Yeah, that was different
Yeah.
for different members.
I remember seeing a chart, but I don't know that it was right.
We will confirm that.
Which, because I know that there was a recent change to, that they went into either the retiree or they went into the active status, where the rate is different than what you're saying. It was 19,000
Yes,
for a board
exactly.
member. I
Yeah, there was
remember that
something
rate. So I'll
There
have
was
to
some
check on
others that
that.
do.
So
It was more than the 16.
So for all current staff members, it's the single rate. We do not have the tiered rate. For post-employment, it's with certainty a tiered rate. Board members, I will find out whether or not they're treated as same as a current employee or as a retiree. All right.
Oh, one other thing.
Sure.
When does bronze come into effect? Only for these classified people who are working less than full-time?
So the option.
As opposed to the higher quality plans that.
So it's for a pretty restricted few. If you look down at the bottom of the page, it's for those employees who work between 6 hours and 6.49 hours per day. If you work under 6 hours, which is 30 hours a week, district doesn't make any contribution toward any of the medical plans. If you work in excess of 32.5 hours a week or 6.5 hours a day, then we make full contribution toward any plan.
And that was my
But-
question, so when I saw 100%, I didn't know if that was 100% of the bronze plan or 100% of the
No.
higher quality plans.
100% of the
Got
plan
it.
you're choosing,
Got it.
or they're
Thanks.
choosing.
But the PPO, is it I mean, there is gold, silver, or bronze even in the PPO, right?
We only offer a single PPO option, but if we're referring to the bronze plan is a term that has come from ACA, from the Affordable Care Act. The bronze plan here is a PPO plan. It's not an HMO, I believe, correct? It's just it's a high deductible plan. And so there are absolutely tiers within PPO offerings, but our district, we only have one, and this would qualify as a gold plan.
I mean, based on just the cost, you know that our plans must be pretty high quality based on,
Very high
the
quality.
comparison to a bronze plan at half the cost of the plans that we typically offer.
Yeah, it certainly is a very, very good plan. When I came from the county office, we did have tiered rates, although it was still a full employer contribution. They at least let you see what they were paying, and they paid a different rate based on if you were, again, single or if you were had a full family. For them, the single party, and their coverage were actually a little higher than ours, but again, ours is a great plan. It was roughly about $9,000 for one person, about $14,500 for two person, and about $21,000 for a full family. So again, by having a blended rate, we're having a lower overall rate, which is why at some point in the past at least we were, and that's why we went with the blended rate. But again, we're in the process right now of doing that analysis in preparation for next year's open enrollment to make sure it still is the best decision.
Right, because you and I had spoke when there's multiple, like let's say the Hoys, the couples who work, we pay that for both pieces of the couple. But it might in the long run still be a cost advantage to us because our staff is also, their children are also covered, right? And I mean, even though we're, sorry to use the line, even though we're paying for both
They're in a
of
whole
them,
different group now.
it's cheaper.
They're on their own group.
It's cheaper to do that, it might be cheaper to do that than to actually have to pay for a family, I mean, we'd have to start negotiating, right, with our staff. Well, we'll cover you, but we won't cover your family.
right,
Or we'll
right,
cover your
certainly.
spouse, but not your children.
Right.
You have to pay, right, so that might not be worth.
Right, so our current plan requires that if we have two family members employed with the district, if they both would qualify otherwise for benefits based on their FTE, then we're required that they both enroll. The only benefit the district receives is that we get 25% cost reduction in, is it both employees or only the second, do you know?
Only on the second.
Yeah, so that's right. So we get a 25% rate reduction on the second employee while we're still paying the full cost on the first, assuming they both would otherwise qualify for benefits. But we do get a little bit of a reduction as opposed to two non-related employees.
Well, it sounds like that's, like, wow, why is that? But of course, it's a self-funded plan, so it kind of doesn't matter other than what's the total cost we're paying for X number of people, right? I mean, that's really how you have to look at it. How many people do we insure? How much does it cost? Whether or not they make us sign two people up who otherwise, if the husband or wife were working somewhere else, they could be on the same plan, doesn't really matter if the average cost is reasonable or the lowest.
I think your point is though that it's 16, the coverage, let's call it 16,000 with these criteria that apply.
Right,
But
exactly.
if we were to figure out some way to have it, the second person not have to pay at all because all the benefits are already accruing, right? It might not be 16, it might be 18.5.
Exactly, that's exactly what we're working right now with CISC and with our benefits manager on is
Yep, so-
getting those update rates, because I think that, both those will likely impact the overall rate. If we went from a blended rate structure to a three-tier system, as well as if we went to being able to not be required to have all staff enroll. The actual effective rate per employee is going to be going up if we want to opt out of, right now the requirement is anyone who would qualify for a 90% contribution toward benefits must be enrolled. So even if their spouse has benefits elsewhere and they don't take ours, they still must be enrolled.
I mean, to have a consortium, right, it really gets complicated, but in our situation, Ojai compared to other districts, because we have declining enrollment, we would have typically in any year, since declining enrollment, which is now 20 years, a relatively lower percentage of single teachers, right? Younger single teachers. You get into a district that has increasing enrollment or even stable, as people retire over the years, you either have those same number of people coming in new, right, if you keep the same teaching staff, right? Or more if you're increasing in enrollment. In our case, as people retired, they weren't always replaced numerically, right? Therefore, we had a relatively more veteran staff compared to districts that didn't have declining enrollment. Right? So therefore, we have, I would bet, a higher percentage of family married, older, more married people. That's what we have.
Say it carefully.
I did. Older is just a factual point.
I mean, and since we're, kind of, free form talking a little bit, I remember when I was running for the board the first time when I lost. Let me take a moment.
Been there.
And I had looked up this whole issue of the post-employment health benefits, which some of you may know, weirdly, the grand jury of Ventura wades into all sorts of things, and the grand jury of Ventura opined at some point in the mid-2000s, I'm thinking, that this was an irresponsible thing, and that the actuarial value of that liability to the district is millions, like $10-12 million. That said, I remember Linda Taylor had said, and it seems logical to me, that if you have an incentive to take out your more senior teachers, notwithstanding how great they are, but, and replace them with entry-level teachers, that the net economic effect is probably positive for the district.
And we've done a lot of that. I mean, we've done numerous charts on that. And in general, even with paying out the medical payments for whatever year it might be, in general, you're right. Right, so it's not a huge savings on the average. It might be $4,000 to $5,000 or so per change, right? So all depends, again, going back to the salary schedule, on how much experience that newer person brings in. I have to tell you, since I'm the one that implemented the salary schedule with people coming in, we did, in fact, when I came here, the more standard maximum was 9 years. And the reason it was 9 years is because our salary schedule was so low. Right? If we offered 5 years to someone who was coming in with 11 years, right, we'd never get the person. So in general, I applied that pretty much, but I brought a couple of people in here at 11 and 12 years. Even coming, the person was giving up $6,000 to $8,000 or more. But it's true. You can, if you just look at it numerically and pick out 15 or 20 people, and we did it. We had a double, two $10,000 per year payout that we made it available 3 and 4 years ago or so, and we had about, between the 2 years, about 10 people or so take it. But the average savings was about $4,000 or $5,000 per person.
Well, these days, retiring, before you're on Medicare and having to pay out for your own insurance, that's, look at these premiums, it's changed your lifestyle for sure.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Can we turn the heat on just for a little?
Sure.
Thank you.
Any other questions on?
So did I hear you, Andy, say that 90%, I'm trying to remember exactly what you said. If you can't decline these benefits.
Correct.
What was the 90%?
Yeah,
90%
so
of the-
for us, it doesn't actually come into play because there's never a case where we're offering 90% of a contribution.
Oh, okay.
Or classified, it couldn't happen because we either offer all or nothing with the exception of the bronze band. And with teachers, it's a prorated amount, and so teachers typically wouldn't have a 90% FTE. If their
teaching 4 sections instead of 5 at Matiwaha, Nordhoff, Chaparral, they'd be, 80%. If they're teaching 2, 3, or 4 days, at the elementary level, and, we're taking, we're part-time teachers, then again, it'd be in the increment of 20, 40, 60, 80% FTE. So, but that would be the only cases if we had a teacher who was 90% or less than, well, yeah, actually that is when it comes to play. But we have a teacher less than 90%, they do not have to enroll in medical.
Which is why the board can also decline those benefits.
Right, right.
Well, the board's not considered part of that, right? They don't care one way or the other. The board takes medical benefits, I assume.
You certainly have the flexibility, that's right.
I mean, our provider they're looking at employees, we're not employees, right?
Correct.
Andy, I want to understand something, I'm kind of confused.
Mhm.
Let's say that, can I use you guys as an example?
That's why they came. 7 o'clock example time.
Wait, it says.
Why were we only invited?
It says right here, LaPont, 5.1.1. So as an example, they're both employees. We're not going to talk about any other thing. You're both full-time employees right now. They are both enrolled automatically.
Correct.
And even if one of them said, well, I don't need you because, like if Martha said, I don't need you because Greg is and I can in the family,
Exactly.
they automatically have to be.
That's correct.
Automatic.
And we pay 75%.
And so you still have to pay.
75%
You pay
of the
75%.
second person.
So you only see a savings of, $4,000 or so by having spouses. And that, again, that
Okay, and
also crosses over from certificate classified, like Bill Rosen and his wife Patty, when they were with
Right.
us. They
Still
were,
have to.
yep.
Okay,
But you
so
would also
now-
still have to, if Greg worked for Apple Computer and he had a great health program and Martha wanted to be,
Exactly.
we would still have to pay for Martha.
Right.
You still have to pay, so that's what
There
was
you
my
go,
next
that's a good
question.
point, yeah.
So, perfect. You have 2 people, husband or wife works for somebody else. You still, even though they say, I want to be on their healthcare plan, their healthcare, we still have to pay out for them.
Based on our current plan, CISC requires it. It's not
Okay, so
a.
that's not our choice.
It's not a local policy, it's not a statutory regulation. It's based on the rate structure that CISC has given us. The plan requires that we have full enrollment of any employee who is entitled to at least 90% of the employer contribution.
I didn't see SIS in the glossary. Can you-
Sorry about that. Each time we bring it up, I always have to pull out my actual card. It's the self-insured school, self-insured schools in California. It's our administrator for medical benefits.
Yeah.
And actually dental and vision now too. We just switched over to them.
If you can get the card out.
It is Self-Insured Schools of California.
Thank you, adding it to my glossary.
On your example, isn't there a part in there if somebody's spouse is in the Medicare range, that if they notify the district, they can waive Medicare? So if I was married to a 65-year-old person and I told you she's 65, you would no longer have to insure them because they become Medicare part. Isn't that a declaration?
Well, I think that's a different point. I think you're correct, Chuck, but I think that's different because are you saying that the spouse, if she were not an employee of the district? Because you're never required actually to enroll your spouse who's a non-employee of the district. If my spouse had insurance coverage elsewhere and I didn't want to actually list her as a dependent on my plan, I would have the option just to have myself on my plan as an employee without having to actually go through the process of submitting my wife's social security card and other information to the business office. So it's not required that you actually add non-employee dependents to your plan, but the district's going to pay the same amount regardless.
I'm guessing that it's just the CISC requires that because they don't want you
So
to
increase their
have a-
pool to
Right, you don't want a
risk.
pool that's mostly sick people.
Absolutely.
You want to force everybody into.
Which is why if we change that, which again at my former employer they had that ability through CISC, so CISC does do it, but there's going to be a increased cost to do that because you have the potential for adverse selection.
Do we still, at one point, I think Danny had said that we actually paid there was like an index or a formula where you paid more or less based on your actual claims history within your sub-pool. Is anything like that going on?
Years prior.
Years prior.
It was calculated that way. It is not any
I'm
longer.
guessing that's probably when we were part of SIBO for medical, because remember, other acronym, SIBO, Coastal Schools Employee Benefit Organization.
Very good. Yeah, right.
SIBO is a local equivalent to CISC. They're a joint power authority. They're a group that comes together of schools that will share the risk and will self-insure for insurance. And so we used to be part of SIBO for all of our medical, dental, and vision. We went away from SIBO and joined CISC for medical. I believe it was in 06 or so, somewhere in that time frame. And we stuck with them for dental and vision up until just 3 months ago. We actually switched over to CISC for everything. So at the time that we were with SIBO, because I know with our dental and vision, they did actually pool us as an individual district. And so our rates were, and that was the reason we made the shift this year, was our dental was going to go up by 20%, and if we switched to CISC, we actually saved $5 per person. So by joining CISC, there's such a large entity, the largest in the state for insurance claims administration, that we're able to just be part of the published rates that every district gets as part of their pool.
So I'm looking at the clock and feeling like we should move forward.
All right,
That's
so
all right.
last section, and this is one that actually I don't think is going to be one that I will give much presenting on, but you can answer questions. This is an actual breakdown of the great majority of our expenditures related to personnel. I say great majority because there were a few areas that are currently unbudgeted, and that we know the total number will end up being slightly higher than this for this year, closer to 21 million. But this captures nearly all of it. What we've done is we've broken out by school site. We did group together like classification, so you'll see, for instance, on page 19, Miners Oaks, that we have the total number of general education instruction, that would be teachers and certificate staff. You have 10 FTE, and it's the total cost for those 10 staff members. Again, remember, total cost when we're talking here is far beyond their actual compensation or their salary. It's all health and welfare, statutory benefits, everything included. You can see going down special education contracted time, and then we've included here the certificated extra help and try to give a description of what that's going toward. School-wide subs is the next category. And then we do the same thing for classified. So we've done this for each of the school sites. Once you get to to Matilaha and Nordoff, you'll see, based on Shelley's request, a breakdown by department. So you can see expenditures comparing, math to English or another subject if you're so inclined.
Thank you, Shelley, for asking for that. I like that.
So again, I'm not sure there's much to present on here. I think it's going to take some time, I'm sure, to adjust, and then I'm open to, Patty and I are open to any questions you have regarding the way the FTEs break out.
Just a quick question on Matilaha, the elective. I mean, right now, isn't the elective arts or foreign language or? So arts being music. I mean, the elective. You just mean the wheel.
Arts includes music, so.
Thomas.
Right.
Old Thomas, Kate, the class. What's the seventh class?
So for arts, we have all of Thomas, and we have one section each of Kate Thomas and Bill Wagner.
Oh, Bill, of course.
So that's arts.
There you go.
For elective, it would be one section each of Margaret Hendrickson, Amber Menares, and Michael Swank.
Is there a way, I know you said special ed definitely, but is there any other way to identify on these expenditures, what is specifically federal funds? Besides special ed?
Besides special ed?
Wouldn't the Title I, so the,
Yeah.
I mean, the all intervention or with all the
We-
intervention? Like, let's say, let's go to the elementary, like minor roads. Would it be, special ed, SBC, RSP, and then the next whole section that's certificated extra help? Is that under most?
It's not all federal.
Federal or not at all, or
Some.
some?
Yeah, I can break down, based on funding source for,
A funding source, or whether it's restricted or unrestricted?
No, whether it's federal or state.
sure, we can do that. That will be,
But you'd see, Angie, the school size-wise, Miners Oaks is fairly considerably smaller than Mirabani. If you look at that same category, Miners Oaks has significantly more dollars spent because of the population that draws the extra funding, right? So, and
So some of that could be LCFF money then, right?
Correct.
A good portion.
right,
it also comes out of the 100,000 or so. Remember, we made that big cut this year in the program that we had for 5 years for the extra hourly help in order to fund additional teacher hiring. But even then, it wasn't 150 or 175, it's still 100, right? And so embedded in there are regular district budget funds that just are completely unrestricted. But those actually have been assigned every year for the last 5 years, almost directly in terms of the number of students. So that's been equitable by students, but when you have a different population, right, have with different needs, then more monies find their way to the school like Miners Oaks.
So I assume that, I mean, I'm just look at one page, I have questions. So as we take this home, I mean, like my one question
You'll
would
have
be.
more.
Right, like department heads at Matilla, it's like, how many are there? Are there 3 or 2 or, sports? Well, I know they have cross-country, basketball and wrestling, right? Or what are, how many, boys and girls, maybe just,
A few others, yeah.
yeah, all right. Yeah, there's volleyball, okay.
we can get however granular.
No, I'm not saying you don't have to give me those right now, I'm just saying those are, yeah, okay. And members of the public could have that too, or that's asking too much? Maybe they should write to us, and we could, because I don't want you getting 100 emails.
And, that'd be better if you
Just ask
put their-
me.
yeah, there won't be 100.
So any updates to this chart, of course, will be posted online. Any additional documents that are requested, we will make sure that everything gets online and available to everyone. We'll make sure we have the updated version for our February 28th meeting. And based on the type of questions I receive, it might be nice to do a little either frequently asked questions or just a Q&A response based on public questions that can also be posted as long as, I'll ask permission from the questioner.
I forgot to bring the index cards, I was gonna hand out index cards.
They seem to do
but-
okay.
Andy, what is the nomenclature contracted refer to?
So it would be our permanent staff. So it'd be, we refer to contracted as, our staff who are, for certificate actually, they do receive, their contracted time, their hours. For classified likewise, each year at the start of the year, we will notify them on a document of what their work schedule is and what their FTE is. Especially on the classified side, not uncommon that you'll have your contracted time. You might be hired as a 4-hour instructional assistant, but based on the needs in that class, you may fluctuate here and there up 15 minutes, half hour based on a field trip. And so we would consider the 4 hours a day your contracted time unless there was an actual change, and those changes come to the board in the personnel packets. The contracted time is the actual set time by which your benefits and everything else would be determined.
but then you may still have some extra hours, and that's where you might see that listed as, classified extra help. So it's possible the clerical classified extra help was actually one of our full-time, or one of our clerical contracted staff who just put in extra hours. Does that make sense? As far as the distinction between contracted time is going to be a permanent position compared to subs or extra hours that would not be contracted.
Yeah, I think I understand what you're saying. I actually, along those lines, I guess we learned that the Nordoff will be adding some library time, and they'll be staffing that with Nordoff teachers, right?
Teachers, as well as the expansion of classified library hours, correct?
Classified librarian.
So in that case, the additional hours for certificate staff in the library will be certificate hourly time. They would not be considered contracted hours.
Right.
For classified, what we're going to be doing is over the next 6 weeks, because we are using a temporary funding source, Title I. It's going to be going in as extra hours pending board approval of the the college readiness block grant, and that funding source, which once that becomes a certain funding source, or a known and a certain funding source over a longer period of time, it become contracted hours for a staff member.
Can you talk about that? Hey, Jane, do we have time for that? I mean, so is this a new source of income for us that you're talking about? That you refer to as when it's more consistent?
So we mentioned 2 funding sources for those in the audience and at home. The board will be receiving our college readiness block grant. Will be coming to the board in the February board meeting for public hearing. The March board meeting will, based on that public hearing, be going for approval. College readiness block grant was part of the governor's budget that was approved in June. It provides a certain base level of funding for each district that has a high school to enhance its offerings targeted especially toward the unduplicated count pupils. Again, that's the EL students, the free and reduced meal application students, and foster youth. Trying to increase their readiness for college, increase A to G, meeting A to G requirements, having passing grades in those classes. It's funding source that is available to us. It'll be given to us, granted up front, but available to expend over a 3-year timeline. And so, unfortunately, actually, we, because of our size, received the minimum amount that they're granting, which is $75,000. Oddly, Valley Oak received that exact same amount, even though they only have 4 students whom qualify for the funding, because again, it is the minimum that every LEA in the state receives.
Wow.
So I sit on their board, and we've been talking about how they plan on spending more than $10,000 per student for this cause. For us, we have $75,000 to be expended over, again, this current school year and then 2 additional years. And so that is while it is limited in duration, it is a certain allocation that we'll receive. And so
there's no discretion involved, or it's the discretion of obviousness. Yeah, sure, we'll take it, right? I mean, is there?
Did we have to apply for it, or everyone gets it?
No, it's an allocation from the state. To actually receive your allocation, you first had to submit a plan for how you'd measure its success. Had to go to CDE by January 1. I submitted that at the beginning of December, so we met that temporal requirement, and that was the actually only base requirement in order to receive your allocation. The next one is actually, I misspoke with that one. This one is really the temporal requirement of when you actually receive the funds. And that is, you can't receive the funds and begin expending money until you actually have your plan for how those funds will be expended approved by the board. So the requirement to receive the requirement to continue to be in track to receive your allocation was to submit the metrics for success. And then now we have to actually get into not surprising, this is how CDE operates. Give us your metrics for success before you have any idea what you're going to do. But that was ultimately what they did. The metrics had to come in before the actual plan of expenditure. But the plan is completely local and discretionary, and that's why we have a public hearing.
Greg has already presented it to the site council at Nordoff. Received support and feedback on the plan expenditures around 5 different key areas. One of them being the expansion of library hours and offering certificated hourly compensation to be able to provide tutoring and provide support to our students.
So the board will just be asked to approve that plan.
The board will be asked, correct?
Any other questions?
I have a question for you,
Sure.
Andy. On page 28,
Yes.
there are a couple of spots where you have donation funded. Can you explain? I'm not sure what, I'm assuming that donate. I don't know what it means. I guess that's what I'm asking.
You want to start on that?
So these are the ones that, when they come in, they say the district is gonna pay for the extra time, but we're gonna in turn bill PTO or.
These are pass-through kind of.
Exactly.
Okay.
So, and we have some that we bill other outside agencies, not just like the PTOs in the community, or for the school sites, we have, we bill Ventura County Office of Ed sometimes, or,
But I know we did like at Topa Topa with the library, I think this was a few years back, but she was contracted for 3 hours, but we wanted her for 4.5 hours a day. So the PTA donated the 1.5 hours for the funds.
I
to the
guess what
district.
I'm trying to figure out though is what that pass-through is paying for in these. It says donated funds, certificated extra hours, $2,200.
We can absolutely pull out that level of detail.
I just wondered if you knew, if they were
You
somehow
have those
categorized.
I have an idea. This one is, we have, there's a donation that for the Avid at the high school.
Okay.
And so this is for extra hours that they do for tutoring. Which one is that one? That one comes from Help of Ohio, I believe. But I can look into this one too. But it's, this one's one that we do know that we have the money, they gave us the money at the end of last year, and we know it's a continuing thing.
Okay.
Would that also be after hours? I know the NPA funds math tutor, I think twice a week. Would that also fall under that category?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, because I know the MPA also donated money for those extra hours, yes.
So then school-wide, VC Innovates I get. What does school-wide mean?
That's just
It's
for
in a
subs.
couple of- Okay, just
So-
generally.
Right.
Well,
So
it also says
Okay,
school-wide
for
up
extra-
above also.
Just more than one extra hour
Right.
in multiple places,
Okay.
rather than listing each one.
I just got a really nice vision when you said that money would go for the library. My brain flashed on that beautiful new library with those tutors, the teacher's assistant, student teacher assistants that are teaching these kids in this beautiful new place. It's like
Lots of
It
light.
it used to
lots of
be a cargo
pretty light
container.
and beautiful wood and, books everywhere and lots of learning and people going, yeah, I wanna go into teaching. Like, I just got that flash and went, yeah, it could be one building at a time. But we have a vision for one building. This is gonna start it, right?
Thane, anything?
All right now. I would like to make a comment. That first explanation of the history of funding, that should be required listening or viewing for everybody who is associated with school. Parents, community, everybody. That was great. Yeah.
If you're gonna complain, read this first.
And I mean, this whole all of these materials. I mean, absolutely. If you're gonna complain, go through this first, because there's a lot of good stuff here, and it really lays it out in a fairly easy to understand way. There are some pages in the middle there that look more like calculus than than algebra, but
Slow.
yeah, for the most part, yeah.
I think one of the things that might be shocking, just the fact, back to facts, is the difference between salary and total cost, right?
Yes.
When you put together statutory impact and health and medical, vision, dental, get it all up, there's some where it's almost as expensive on the second as compared to the first, or in some of those percentages, way over quarter or a third, and then much more. So it depends on what your salary is, obviously. The higher the salary, the lower the percentage. But particularly on the classified side, where you're paying a double retirement situation, it's quite expensive. It's just a fact. That's just the way it is.
Well, if there's no more questions, I think I will adjourn the meeting. February 28th is what we decided, I think?
That's the next budget meeting.
The next budget meeting. Our school board meeting.
Budget meeting.
February 28th. We do have a regular scheduled meeting February 7th.
7th is right.
7th, yeah. Okay, thank you, everyone.
Good job.